Today is Friday, December 20th, 2024. This is Quickstar from CBN News. I'm Dan Andros. A traditional last-minute spending bill goes up in flames, and then a streamlined bill does exactly the same. We'll have that top story and more on today's podcast, where we bring you news from a Christian perspective. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating. Send us your thoughts. Quickstar Podcast at cbn.org. We'd love to hear from you, as we're all here together, getting through the news of the cray each and every weekday, bright and early. And joining me to get through it today, CBN's Billy Hallowell and Trey Goins-Phillips. A lot to get to today, gentlemen. What do we have coming up on the focus story?
Well, J.D. Vance, Vice President-elect, he had some advice for somebody complaining about prayer, and so we're going to get into that. It's very, very funny, and also there's also some seriousness to it, though, too.
Yeah,
so
it'll spark a good conversation for sure. Looking forward to that. Also on the main thing, according to some recent findings, there's a shocking amount of young people who feel basically hopeless. They don't have any sense of their true identity or why they're here, their purpose in life. CBN's Charlene Aaron spoke with a ministry trying to bridge this gap among young people and help them find that true source of their identity and meaning. So good conversation there. There's a segment coming up on the main thing. All right, make sure you subscribe to all of our CBN News podcasts, DC Debrief with John Stolnis, Billy's Newsmakers. Also, Jesus and the Prophecies of Christmas, Episode 3, coming out tomorrow. You'll catch it on this feed right here. And the fourth and final episode will be on Monday, 2 days before Christmas. We're going to be off on the podcast next week for the Christmas break, but make sure you check out those two episodes coming up here on Saturday and Monday. All right, and with that, we are going to head over to the news now in 90 seconds. And President-elect Donald Trump and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance criticized the interim spending bill as benefiting government censors and Liz Cheney while shielding January 6th committee records and granting congressional pay raises. The 1,547-page bill failed in the House on Thursday night, falling 174 to 235. The government shutdown looming late Friday. Trump and Vance pushed for a streamlined bill focused on supporting farmers, disaster relief, and long-term fiscal success without concessions to Democrats. The national debt has exceeded $36 trillion with a $1.8 trillion deficit, amplifying the stakes of the spending debate as lawmakers remain deadlocked. Elon Musk threatened to back primary challengers against Republicans who supported the initial big bill and then didn't support the streamlined bill, while President-elect Trump demanded any spending deal included debt ceiling to avoid burdening his incoming administration. And the U.S. Supreme Court will hear Kerr versus Planned Parenthood South Atlantic, a case challenging whether pro-life states like South Carolina can exclude abortion providers such as Planned Parenthood from receiving Medicaid funds. You could read more about that story over at cbnnews.com. Guys, this spending bill that went up in flames, this is a thing that some Republicans were pointing out. The people are saying they predicted it. And I think it was Thomas Massey or somebody like that was saying that this was going to come. And he said this, it doesn't take Nostradamus to predict this. He's saying this is what they do every year. They wait until Christmas and then they threaten and say, we're going to put through this spending bill and either pass it or you're going to have to stay here for Christmas. And every year they end up just passing it, whatever's in there. And one of the ones that really riled people was the provision. It wasn't necessarily a pay raise, but it was removal of the language to freeze the, a cost adjustment for living, the cost of living adjustment. So the pay wasn't frozen. What they typically do is freeze that pay until they can look at salaries among constituents across the country and say, well, if it's gone way ahead of where Congress is at, well, then that would justify we're going to raise the number. But that's how they're supposed to do it. They just want to put in and let it be unfrozen so that they can add these cost of living adjustments. And they're already making way more than the average person in America does, and particularly a lot of these constituencies that aren't very wealthy and they come from rural areas that are, not expensive to live in. And it's supposed to be a time of service. I think that's the thing that's frustrating for most people. It was supposed to be time of service to go into Congress. And that requires some sort of sacrifice. Now they're looking for their cake and eating it too. So you stay there forever. You know, you redistrict, you draw the lines, you stay in there forever. And now we're getting pay raises to live in two places. I mean, that is like the exact opposite of what the founders intended.
Yeah, well, I think the bigger issue here is that you're watching this debate about government spending unfold. And, you know, look, Trump's first term, there was a lot of spending, right? That
Yeah.
still went on, right? So, and that's something
Debt
that's
went up.
important that we acknowledge. It went up, debt went up. But I do think that we've hit a place where it is no longer sustainable for debt to continue going up. And look, regardless of what happened the first time around with Trump, you now have him putting people in charge of cutting government waste. This has been a major focus, which we are seeing with Musk and others being brought in to deal with this issue. So I'm not shocked that they're sort of digging their heels in on this. My hope is that it's one of those things that actually leads to a productive reduction in spending, meaning we get rid of the things we don't need and we're able to keep the things, or maybe even expand the things that we do need to be spending on.
It definitely is refreshing to see Elon Musk coming in and wanting to kind of cut all of the inefficiencies in our government, because we know the inefficiencies are plentiful. But I think really every time it comes around that we need a new CR for the budget and for spending, it's just theater, right? Like everybody knows they're gonna pass it. Nobody's gonna bat an eyebrow or bat an eye at it, or raise an eyebrow about any of the spending that has just become so commonplace in DC. Whether you're Republican or Democrat, that used to be something I remember the Republicans really, really cared about. But unfortunately, it just has kind of gone by the wayside, and we continue to approve spending money and printing monopoly money that we obviously don't have. So setting aside Trump's first term, where spending definitely did not go down, it is encouraging to see that is, like Billy said, at least at the onset, going to be a focus of Trump 2.0.
Yeah. And look, and if this movement, you know, the MAGA movement, if it really is about things like, hey, making a government more efficient and more fiscally responsible, well, then it'll be bigger than the man, and it will be able to criticize if his administration isn't following what it said it was going to follow. And so we'll see. We'll see if that happens, because I think Americans are kind of tired of the waste, and there's felt like there's no recourse, that no matter who is in charge, Republican or Democrat, it was just going to keep going up no matter what happens. So we'll see. We'll see if we do have an actual change of course. I do think people are excited for that on both sides of the aisle on certain issues like this one, right? I think it's hard to be against government, for government waste, right? And to not be against that. So we'll see if we can have some unifying issues there. All right. We're going to head over to the focus story now. And Vice President-elect J.D. Vance had a message for an individual who complained over prayer. What's the story here?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. It all started after a person out there, an unnamed individual, wrote to the New York Times Magazine's The Ethicist column to complain about the fact that an 85-year-old neighbor, whom the writer called a very sweet friend and a caring person, that this elderly individual would not stop praying. And I mean, it's really a bizarre complaint. And so when you read through, I'll just read a portion of it. My issue is that she's very religious and I'm not at all, the individual said. She prays for me and says it in person, texts, and emails for even the most minor of situations. I've told her my view of religion and that she doesn't need to pray for me. But apparently this elderly prayer warrior will not stop praying. And so the person complaining continued saying, she said she has to, otherwise she's not following the Bible. I'm trying to ignore this, but it's really bothering me that she can't respect my wishes. Now, this is again being written to the New York Times Magazine. This person wants advice on how to handle this horrific atrocity that this elderly woman is praying. And J.D. Vance clearly saw this and thought it was ridiculous. He takes a screenshot of it and he responds to it. And, he says, what should you do? Obviously a rhetorical question. He follows up with, accept it as a sweet gesture and stop being a weirdo. or consider that the woman praying for her neighbors has it more figured out than the person whining to the paper.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, before we go on, I have more questions for you, Billy, but God bless this grandmother. I absolutely love her already. Everyone needs a neighbor like this in their life. I don't know what else she does, or but she clearly has her priorities right with this, and I love where her focus is. It's just awesome. You hear the description of it, and the fact that this is described as a complaint, regardless of if you're a believer or not, it's just utterly ridiculous. You're looking for something to be, you know, angry about. But what did the Times recommend?
So this is what I love about this. You know, one of the odd times you'll find the New York Times and JD Vance in agreement. The New York Times writer Kwame Anthony Appiah, he took a gentler approach, but in his response he said, "Look, it's a good thing that this elderly woman and the person complaining can be honest about their differences." But then he went on to say, "If you don't think these prayers will do you any good, you presumably also don't think they'll do you any harm. By contrast, she thinks that you'll be worse off without them," meaning the elderly woman, "and that praying for you is her duty. The only reason you give for objecting to her prayers is that she has failed to comply with your wishes." He then goes on to say that it didn't seem like the woman disrespected the person complaining, and that, really this elderly woman can't be forced to stop her prayers. He said, "You're not entitled to insist that she stop including you in her prayers. What you can fairly ask is simply that she refrain from informing you about them." But I thought this was interesting. He ended it by basically saying he encouraged the writer to see the prayers as a sincere expression of love and care for her, right? And I remember interviewing Penn Jillette years ago, who's an atheist, right? And he actually described a very similar story to me, but he was like, "Look, I actually appreciated this man not wasting his time, but taking his time to evangelize me because he really loved and cared for me. And I saw that even though I didn't believe it." And
Yeah.
that's what this New York Times writer
Yes.
wants this person to see.
Yeah, and I mean I've seen Penn give that's a fantastic response, and that is the appropriate response for an atheist or anyone to have. Like, you don't have to agree with somebody when they're giving you well wishes. Like when people say to me like, "I'm sending good thoughts your way." Like in my mind that's ridiculous, right? You can't how are you sending, apart from God, how are you sending good thoughts to me, right? I think it's silly. But I'm not going to tell them like, "Well, that's dumb. Stop doing it. You're offending me." Like I'm going to say thanks because I understand they care about me, right? And I should appreciate that. And yeah, I think that's kind of the bigger thing here. Correct me if you guys feel the same, but I do think that's the thing. Like we've lost this ability. Everyone's so in their silos and what they believe, and they've been taught by, I think, secular progressives that anything that disagrees with you is some sort of microaggression and it's this big harm to you. And in the name of diversity and tolerance and inclusion, they've actually kind of shunned everything that doesn't go along with their view. And it's like this big no-no, and you can't say it, and it's bad and it's scary. When in reality, we should be able to, as a society, regain this value of understanding when people are being kind to you, and whether you agree with them or not on their beliefs, appreciate that. Is that so hard to do?
Apparently, yes.
Yeah.
Very hard to do. Very, very hard to do, Dan.
But do you guys agree with that assessment, though? Like that culture's kind of lost that ability just because of social media and everything else. We've siloed ourselves, and now we're looking for ways to be offended rather than just to be and live and, help one another.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
I think I've wondered, is that really a result of social media, or is social media really just put a magnifying glass up to our human inclination, right? I think it just has given us a greater platform to express our own brokenness as human beings. So I think all of those inclinations are probably already there. They've definitely been exacerbated by social media, but I don't know that social media served as the impetus for those things. But yeah, for sure, I think it's been made worse by social media. With this story in particular, I love the JD Vance's throwback to Tim Walz by calling him,
Yeah.
stop being a weirdo, because that was Tim Walz's claim to fame during the campaign, was like, JD Vance is so weird. Which I guess, as it turns out, most people think JD Vance is normal, and Tim Walz was the one who I guess was a little bit on the weird side.
The vice presidential debates sort of nuked the idea that he was weird, and kind of turned around, and maybe people thought there was a little projection going on there once the microscope got shined on there a little more.
Yeah. Well, I do think, I think it's the silos mixed with the selfishness and, there's no God, I'm the God. So all these things, the social media, it all fuels the same thing. So now you just get to become a massive complainer when anything offends you. And I think people had way more grit before. I mean, we were sending 18-year-olds off to war. You think about World War II. Now you've got, 35-year-olds who can't figure out, how to get in their car and go to work. I mean, we're in very strange times.
Well, and it reminds me of like the guy that went into the Chick-fil-A years ago and thought he was going to have this big viral moment and tell them off at the window and say, oh, you guys are so hateful. But he ended up looking like the fool in that situation and ended up losing his job and everything else for just being a hostile buffoon. And I think a lot of people do think that. I saw another clip of some guy, one of these YouTube channels that does these like conversations with college kids, and it's like everyone's in a chair in a circle, but Ben Shapiro is in the middle, and this trans dude guy, I don't know if it was a girl or what, I'm like confused.
Oh, I remember this.
He's yelling at Shapiro and doesn't even let him talk. Like he can't even get a word in.
Shapiro just kept saying sir. He just kept saying sir, and every time it would just trigger this person to the point of a almost physical altercation.
Yeah. Well, you might be talking about a different one. That was the one where he's on Dr. Drew, right? Like
I'm thinking of the CNN one. Maybe it might have been Dr. Drew.
Yeah.
Either way,
this was a YouTube
premise.
thing. It's the same premise. It's the same idea. But but anyway, like they think in their minds, for whatever reason, for being in their silo or whatever it might be, that they're going to look like this amazing champion, but you end up just looking like a jerk because that's not how humans are supposed to interact. And that happens on both sides of the aisle. But I feel like as society, just because we're so disconnected from one another in person, we've kind of lost that ability a little bit to interact. And I think people are longing for that, and we'll see if people get back to that. But I'm glad you brought this particular story to the podcast today, because it is a good conversation, because we can't go on like this as a society, as a culture, where we can't agree to disagree at the end of the day and still respect one another as human beings. So we'll definitely continue to highlight stories like that, because whatever we can do in our little corner of the world to help people start acting like humans and treating each other like humans again, I'm all for that. All right, we are going to head over to the main thing now. And according to some recent findings, research, there's a lot of young people here who have huge feelings of hopelessness and anxiety, and they don't really have a true sense of their identity or their purpose and why they're here. Well, CBN's Charlene Aaron spoke with a ministry trying to help people find their way and to bridge this gap and really discover what they're really here for and more. That conversation is today's main thing.
A recent Gallup survey found a surprising number of teenagers feel the pressure to be perfect all the time, leading to negative emotions. Young Life, a Christ-centered ministry focused on helping kids know Jesus, wanted to learn more in hopes of turning those feelings in a more positive direction through its Relate project.
Around 40% of young people don't know or don't believe that they are worthy of love. It's something that should burden us all.
For more than 80 years, Young Life has focused on the lives of kids in the U.S. and beyond, building relationships through trust and sharing the good news of Christ. Ministry Vice President Dr. Arthur Satterwhite helped conduct research for the Relate project.
As those who are called to come alongside young people, knowing who this generation is, where they are, what's their context, is a big part of us being able to go to them, build relationship, and earn the right to be heard.
Also on the minds of Gen Z, relationships and communicating not online, but in person. More than half communicate most often one-on-one with their closest friend. Another 20% talk through phone calls, FaceTime, or WhatsApp. The remaining 25 tend to use texts, email, and direct messages to communicate with friends. Friends and family are the primary sources of help for adolescents. And for this young generation, 40% worry about their mental health. And when it comes to technology, the study found over 35% turn to social media when feeling anxious.
So the opportunity for us is not so much how do we get them off of it, It's how do we help them leverage it for positive aims? How can we equip them with a theology of technology that helps them to process where and how can this help me think and go deeper in my relationship with God?
Something Stafford Kramer with Young Life in Virginia Beach wants to dive into with these young people.
It can't just be verbal proclamation. There's got to be something tangible that kids can remember, that they can hold on to, that they can touch, that they can feel, that they can smell, that they can relate to in their personal lives.
The heart of Young Life involves connecting with kids via clubs and weekly Bible studies like this one. Many point out how this generation and their needs have changed post-COVID.
I think kids are a little less innocent. This crazy pandemic I think, took away some of their innocence and kind of forced them to grow up a little bit too quick.
Challenges Satterwhite says the gospel can help by developing new strategies.
This research is helping us understand what is the context that might inform what are today's methods, what are the new wineskins, and what is the new than the new wine.
It's a shift other ministries such as InterVarsity and Crew are also considering as they review Young Life's findings.
It's been fun to see these other organizations who are struggling with some of the same things, with a similar heart for young people, wrestle with, man, what are the implications for our ministry? How might we be more intentional about creating belonging for the young people that are calling our community home or being drawn to our community?
I think that we had to and have become people where we're constantly sharing our lives with these students. We are entering into the lives of kids day in and day out consistently.
And when it comes to the faith of Gen Z, a positive response.
What we found that was faith as a framing story helps folks, especially young people, to contextualize, like, what does belonging mean? Where do I fit in? And what could that look like as we help them to know not just who they are, but whose they are and what they're called to. That's what we're seeing as a direct correlation to increased flourishing.
A flourishing this ministry is helping to shape.
There are 60 kids showing up every Friday before school to go to Bible study. We started, there might have been 10 people. And that was a big number for us. So to have 60 and it's just continuing to grow, these kids are really resonating with the purpose, the love, the consistency that Jesus gives. And they're really grabbing hold to that.
I know and have seen kids walk from death to life, and they're not hopeless.
Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Charlene, thanks for that encouraging report there. That's going to leave us with time on the podcast today for one last thing, and we are going to take a look at Matthew 18:5-6. Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me, but whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fastened around his neck and to be drowned in the depth of the sea. And that's a super convicting verse when we look at and thinking about all of the young people we impact and the influence we can have over their lives, positive or negative.
Yeah, I think some people ought to fly some airplanes with that message over some homes in certain areas of this country. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. It's an encouraging verse in that, we know we can accomplish those things and accomplish that faithfulness through the Lord. But apart from that, we can't.
All right. Good spot to leave it. We are heading into Christmas break here. And I hope you have a fantastic Christmas. As I said, make sure you're listening to the Jesus and the Prophecies of Christmas, episode 3 tomorrow on this feed, and also episode 4, the final episode on Monday. Merry Christmas. God bless you. And we'll see you next time.